Trying to explain Death Stranding is weird. Not in a narrative sense, because I think the narrative is pretty straightforward, but explaining what Death Stranding is as an experience is incredibly difficult. I've tried to explain it, but every single time I've tried recommending this game to somebody, I've only been able to say, you just kind of have to play it for yourself. It's a game so unique and so personal that you're bound to come off the game feeling something different compared to somebody else. And today, I want to explore why that is. Every time I talk about a game on the channel, I usually preface it by saying that I love the game or the series it's attached to, and that's true for the most part. I don't really talk about games that I'm just kind of mediocre on, because there's not really much for me to write about there. I need the game to evoke a strong enough feeling to warrant writing about the game. Death Stranding is a bit different though. This is a game that I've been trying to talk about forever. It's haunted me in a way because I didn't think I could really do it justice since this game means so much to me on a personal level. When I first played it a few years ago, it immediately ranked amongst my favorite titles, but as I've sat with it longer and just completed another playthrough for this video, I've realized that it's not amongst my favorites. It is my favorite game. Death Stranding is a very unique yet divisive game. It's so much more than the gameplay alone, but despite that, it's constantly reduced to a walking simulator. In recent years, people have started to come around to the title, especially following the announcement of its sequel, but it's still seen as a game that's too niche or weird to properly get into. As someone who loves Kojima games and all the isms often attached to them, for better and for worse, I think Death Stranding is the greatest project he's directed because it's the most personal feeling project. It's the project that has the most to say, but only if you listen. The game explores connections between individuals and connections within that greater society. It explores the concepts of legacy, family, isolation, and it asks questions about the future of an ever-connecting world. I can gush about this game all day, and if you'll indulge me, that's what I'm here to do. The flow of this video will roughly, in big air quotes, follow the flow of the game. I'll be talking about the story throughout, so if you haven't played the game, this is your one and only spoiler warning, as I'll be just spoiling it throughout the video. I recommend playing the game first and then chipping away as you play the game, or just coming back after the fact, because I don't want to ruin the experience for you. This is a game that I would highly recommend just playing as blind as possible, but if you're watching this video, you've probably already played the game. But with that out of the way, this is a commentary, if you want to call it that, and analysis, again, if you want to call it that, of Death Stranding. Death Stranding has one of my favorite openings ever in a game. It opens with a quote from Kobo Abe's Nawa, or rope in English. It explains the concept of rope and stick, which is a concept the game will repeatedly mention as it's very important to what makes the world of Death Stranding function. The concept of rope and stick essentially represents mankind and our core tendencies to either make a rope to help bring the good towards us or make a stick and push away the bad. The core mythos of the game relies on the idea of rope and stick to help connect you, not only with the characters, but the other players who will leave an impact on your game. The quote passes and you hear the subtle fade in of the song Don't Be So Serious by Low Roar as Norman Reedus vaguely explains how the world came to be. That, followed by the glances of the world, create such a memorable first 5 minutes on a strictly visual aspect alone. The introduction is capped off by showing one of the most important aspects of Death Stranding, and that is the BTs and the timefall. When it comes to the timefall, all we see at first is the rain from a distance, these wide stage shots. It's not until we see Sam and we catch up with him where we see what the timefall actually does. It's presented with this reverse rainbow in the sky, birds are flying the other direction, and then we see a single drop of rain turn one of Sam's hair strands gray. It's then followed by a BT chasing Sam on his bike. This section doesn't just fill you with questions about what's going on, it also introduces the core delivery obstacle of the game, and that is timefall and BTs, and how when there's one, there's likely the other. The best part about the opening, however, comes right after you meet Leah Seydoux' character Fragile in a cave. You have an encounter with a BT, and then she starts talking for a bit. She explains how she's fragile, but she's not that fragile. I don't know, it's a stupid line and I really like it. But about 15 minutes into the game, we get this first real stretch of gameplay. And as you start walking down the hill, a continuation of the song Don't Be So Serious starts playing again. And for whatever reason, this section makes me very emotional. There's something so meticulous about the needle drop here, combined with the view that you're given, that just hits me like an emotional freight train every single time. It's nothing special, really, but I think just the sense of adventure that you're about to embark on is what gets me. I'm not quite sure. I still don't know why it hits me the way it does, but it just does, man. As anyone who plays the game knows, Death Stranding is just a glorified MP3 player. It exists to show us the cool music Kojima likes. The choice to use Low Roar's music for the majority of the licensed music in the game gives Death Stranding that much more identity, and the story behind its inclusion honestly encapsulates the central idea of the game perfectly. In his book, The Creative Gene, Kojima recalls a trip to Iceland. While in a taxi, one of the band's songs was playing, and the driver recommended that Kojima pick up some of their music because he liked the sound, and they were described as the Icelandic Joy Division. While purchasing some CDs in a shop, Low Roar's music came playing over the speakers, and Kojima listened to the music all the way home. The decision to include them in the game and use their music in the reveal trailer stemmed from the idea of connections because, as he states in his book, quote, "The approach wasn't limited to the music either. The cast of actors for Death Stranding came about the same way, starting with Norman Reedus and Mads Mikkelsen. I had seen them acting and liked them. Because I liked them, I wanted to meet them. I thought I'd like to work with them one day. Following that course, I met with them in real life." End quote. He continues on about how that extended to the other actors and other guests in the game, but that root idea of connecting with people and wanting to share ideas is the entire basis of Death Stranding, and that feeling comes off strong in the game. It can make a player reflect on their own lives, in my opinion, especially when the sound fades out and the music fades in. The rest of the intro is pretty on rails, as you're tasked with helping some corpse disposal guys get rid of a body before it becomes necrotized, since in the world of Death Stranding, if a beach thing comes in contact with a human, it triggers a cataclysmic event known as a void out. The game takes time to explain this to you, and then you get to see it happen right in front of your eyes, which also allows the game to show you that Sam is what is known as a repatriate, somebody who can come back to life through his connection to the beach, and some elaborate shenanigans explained at the tail end of the game. The section where you watch the void out is another reason why I love the intro to this game. You watch as these people who can't come back to life like Sam are forced to try everything in their power to prevent this void out. One guy tries shooting himself in the head, but he slips before he can, so we have to sit there and watch him pitifully stab himself in the chest over and over and over again just so he can die before he's taken away. It fails, and what follows is just wild. You wake up on the beach, you're just butt-ass naked, and you see these 5 figures just floating in the air, and then boom, the title card hits. And it's so just weird and out there, and then you fall into the water and you come back to life. I remember the first time I had played the game all those years ago. My mouth was just agape when I saw this. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Not because it's the most out there thing I've ever seen, or because I thought it was the coolest thing ever, but just the complete tonal whiplash of the first 5 minutes compared to the last, 10 of the prologue is just insane to me. The fact that you go from point A to point B, back to point A, so constantly in this game. It's why it works so well. It's why I love the game so much. 1 minute you're listening to Low Roar delivering packages. The next you're witnessing this cataclysmic event which took a city off the map. You wake up, you see the crater, it's in the shape of a hand, and you're just left with this striking image. It establishes this very rudimentary version of the gameplay to come, and then immediately shows you how weird and striking the world around the gameplay is. One last thing I want to mention about the prologue chapter is something that is slightly controversial, and that is the clear affinity for film actors and celebrities that Kojima has when casting the games, and that is put on full display in Death Stranding. In order to understand why the game is the way it is, you have to look back at a lot of Kojima's past work, since Death Stranding is very much a game about legacy. That's something I'll tap into a bit later, as there's one mission in specific that feels very appropriate for the subject. But right now, let's flash back to Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. A large point of controversy with that game was the decision to replace the English voice actor for Solid Snake, David Hayter, with Kiefer Sutherland. The reason to recast Hayter with Sutherland was because Kojima apparently wanted to reimagine the character and allow for a more subdued performance utilizing motion capture performances. Within the context of the story and looking at the actual performance, I quite like Kiefer Sutherland as Venom Snake. I think he did pretty well. The Metal Gear series was no stranger to long cutscenes and Hollywood-esque productions, but it was Phantom Pain where you could see that line being ever so slightly blurred when it came to the barrier between game and film, especially when you look at how that game was structured when it came to cutscene direction and its more episodic format. The Phantom Pain experiment, if you will, came full circle this time around, however, because the cast is almost entirely just star-studded, with most of the major characters being Hollywood or TV actors. Within the first few hours, you'll meet Norman Reedus, Leah Seydoux, Tommy Earl Jenkins, Mads Mikkelsen, and Lindsay Wagner, among others. One of the only major characters performed by a video game voice acting veteran is Troy Baker as Higgs, who is great. And again, I'll get to him in a bit. He actually shows up in the prologue as he's implied to be the one who leaves the void out, but he just shows up and immediately leaves for a moment. It's a bit of weird world building. Try saying that 5 times fast. I've seen conflicting views about the more star-studded nature of this game, and I lie in the camp of enjoying it. The performances in this game are all just amazing. It gives Death Stranding this unique sense of identity because of just how many traditional actors are in this game. Hollywood actors have this stigma in discussions surrounding video games because a lot of the time these actors gave bad performances, to say the least. These actors aren't trained voice actors, so it would often just be a performance to coincide with a movie tie-in game or just as a promotional stunt. That's not to say there's never been a good performance from a traditional actor in a game. I think Benny in New Vegas is an example that a lot of people immediately think of, and yeah, he's great in that game. But with the improvement in motion capture technology, it's a lot easier to capture emotive live performances, and it's given way to some great performances in recent memory, Death Stranding included. All of that to say, I really enjoy the prologue here. It works astronomically well at immersing the player into the world, but the only thing it really misses out on is the gameplay, considering just how much the game stops you in order to tell you what's going on or to show you something cool. Its exposition seems like it's there to just fluff and overcomplicate the plot, since at the start you're given the very basic task of connecting America. You won't actually experience the payoff for like 40 hours or so, but as the mystery of the world was untwined, I found myself appreciating the game more for front-loading it instead of constantly stopping me along the way. It's an issue that's only really prevalent during the first few hours of gameplay. At a certain point, it kind of just stops. But considering that this is the first Strand-type game, or whatever the hell that means, it makes sense that the game is constantly stopping you to make sure you aren't left behind, because at a certain point, the game just becomes pretty hands-off. You're let loose for a long time, and it's not for a while that you get let back on the tracks of the story. The entire eastern region, which consists of episodes 1 and 2, are more in line with an extended tutorial than the real game. It's where a lot of people bounce off the game because it's a few hours of the game being arguably at its slowest. Episode 1 especially so, since this acts mainly as a story dump, taking time to explain stuff like the state of the country, Bridget Strand is the last president and your mom, stuff like the homo demons, where's Amelie, all that jazz. But it's here where Sam is tasked to connect America and head west, because heading west is how he's going to rescue Amelie, his sister, from the previously mentioned homo demons. Sam is against this at first. He thinks America's done for, and the idea of making another America is just a pipe dream. It's here where I should mention that Sam has a phobia known as aphenphasmophobia, or the fear of contact. In the game, you can see Sam has various hand-shaped bruises on his body because his version of the phobia is so severe that it will literally leave him with bruises when touched. The game extends this phobia into his character as a whole. His fear of contact extends into the fear of connecting. He's pretty much an isolationist. He just wants to do his own thing and be involved as little as possible. In my opinion, I think Sam works very well as a player character for Death Stranding because Sam is one of the few characters that is not very complex, and Norman Reedus plays into this very well. Sam's arc throughout the entire experience is pretty linear. He's reserved by the start and less so by the end. He's not fully open to everyone, but he's less of a shell. It's in Reedus' physical performance, his body language, that sells this arc to the player. If you've seen anything else with Norman Reedus, you can see that by the way he portrays his characters, they're all pretty similar. He is a great physical actor, but if you aren't paying attention, he can come off as wooden because of his vocal delivery, pun intended. I will be damned if I try to say awesome phasmophobia every single time, so from now on I'll just call it Sam's phobia or something along those lines. But one detail that I love when it comes to this phobia is how he views his own mother. At one point in the hospital, she's talking to Sam. She tries to touch him because she wants to comfort her son as she dies. He flinches though, and he moves back. This makes her fall out of her chair, and then she crawls towards him. The camera shifts to this first-person perspective, and we can see her on the ground, almost like a monster, covered in her own blood. Sam is scared of her because of his phobia. He refuses to comfort her in her last moments, and she dies right there on top of him, refused to be comforted by her own son. Just a moment ago, I mentioned how Bridget was the last president of the United States, and now she's dead. So the next chunk of gameplay has you taking her to the incinerator because, one, we don't want her to necrotize and cause a void out, and two, the people can't know that the last president of the United States is dead. There has to be hope. Every so often, the game likes to give you this type of challenge where you carry a body on your back, alive or dead. It restricts what kind of cargo you can carry, and here it's the most basic version of that, since the game is teaching you about planning a route and balancing weight on your back, since carrying a person often involves you shifting your weight a lot more compared to normal cargo to counterbalance the weight of a person on your back. I absolutely adore this set piece because, again, the music sets the tone very well, and it just emotionally hits you like a truck. If you've ever dealt with the death of a relative or a loved one, you can connect to Sam having to carry his own mother to the incinerator, because that's what this game's all about in a way. The gameplay is fun, yes, but the game is more about the emotion it evokes in you and how you choose to connect the game to your own life. Again, these first two episodes are essentially fancy tutorials, so the game takes everything really, really slow. You can never carry that much cargo, you never have to prepare that far ahead, everything is a pretty reasonable distance away. The game is teaching you in this one foot in front of the other style. Again, pun intended. Because the game decides to take it so slow at the start, this is what gives the perception of Death Stranding just being a walking simulator. Because for the first 4 or so hours, yeah, you're pretty much just walking. But each way station in the region gives you a new challenge to see if you're ready for the next much larger portion of gameplay found in the central region. The first station of the region asks you one of two things. Will you go straight through the BT path, possibly damaging your cargo in the rain and running the risk of being caught, or will you go left and take the longer path through the hill, climbing up a mountain and having to go down with a rope someone left for you? But again, you're also running the risk of damaging your cargo if you fall, but you take a little longer to avoid BTs. The game is teaching you not just about planning your routes, but also just about the core Death Stranding experience. Do you take the longer way around that's safer, but again, longer? Or do you decide to take a shortcut, go through the fast way, but you often have to experience more trouble that way? After you complete that first relatively simple delivery, the next delivery asks you to go to the next distribution center. But the challenge they throw at you this time is mules. What are mules? Mules are people who were once porters but develop something called delivery-dependent syndrome, where they feel the insatiable need to deliver cargo and experience the high they get from delivery. So, what they do is just jack your shit and knock you out. The game is asking you to not only escape the mules with all your cargo intact, but to then enter a BT-infested area and navigate that almost immediately after the fact. It's constant dangerous uptime, so you have to navigate the BB not crying, keeping your cargo, not being caught, and maintaining stamina. After you deliver that cargo, the game then has 2 more challenges for you, one for each main location you'll deliver to. One involves you navigating this foresty region filled with rain and BTs again, but here, there's just so many BTs that you have to do it in a timely manner, but also not take too long so you don't damage your cargo. It's not the hardest challenge in the game, even up to this point, but the sheer amount of BTs in this small condensed area is usually what makes a lot of people who are tackling the game for the first time mess it up, just because it's very easy to set them off, even as an experienced player. Your last delivery-related challenge involves one long delivery from one end of the region to another. The game asks you to navigate every challenge from before and adds one more BT-filled region, but this time the ground is covered in rocks, which makes it significantly easier for you to topple over and get caught by BTs or lose your cargo, sometimes even both. But it's all worth it, because when you get to the top of the hill, proving you have what it takes to go west, the game presents you with one of its most beautiful moments. When you reach the top of the hill and leave that BT-infested area, you can see the sky clears up, the rain stops almost immediately, and you're given the sweeping view of Port Knot City with a straightway path. While on that path, the song Asylums for the Feeling starts to play. The game has thrown a few needle drops at you throughout these first 2 episodes periodically, but nothing quite like this needle drop. It's the game not only rewarding the player for essentially proving that they're ready for the rest of the game, but also giving you a mechanical and visual answer to what Death Stranding is even about. The game is about the reward one gets from connecting the world and delivering packages in a mechanical sense, and if this scene makes you feel anything, whether it's your heart skipping a beat, tearing up, or even just being glad you made it through the BTs, it basically means the game has you in for the long run, considering this happens right around the 4 to 6 hour mark. For the longest time, I've had this moment cemented in my head. I never quite understood why, though. I still don't have an exact emotion to pinpoint to the scene because I feel something different every single time I witness it. Sometimes it makes me cry, other times it just leaves me breathless, but my connection to the game is why I always have such an extreme reaction to this scene. I had originally played Death Stranding during a rough patch in my life. It wasn't anything horrible compared to what other people go through daily, but my mental health was in the gutter. Everything had felt unreal to me. I had plenty of people to talk to, and it was my senior year of high school, but I just felt uneasy all the time. The future was rapidly coming towards me, and in all honesty, I didn't know how to deal with it. I don't know if I was depressed or if I just had really bad anxiety or something worse. I don't know. I never got checked out. That's besides the point. But I had just finished a round of unrelated medication and I just wanted to be alone. But on a whim, I followed a friend's recommendation. I started playing Death Stranding, and even then, this was almost exactly what I needed. The needle drop for Asylums of the Feeling, and the following scene represents where I was mentally at the time. You can see the future, it's right there. Everything has lit up following this rough patch. Port Knot is right there, yet it still feels empty and damaged. You can see the effect of the Death Stranding and how people haven't really recovered. It asks the player, how could anyone recover from this? People are isolated and it's very much intentional. They don't want to change that. It's up to the player to change their minds, just like how it's up to you to turn the course of your life around by building a support network. For the United States, it's by building a chiral network, and for Sam, and by proxy the player, it's by building a support network of friends and realizing that together, you're able to do a lot better than if you were alone. It's the basis of the social strand system, which I'll touch on here in the next chapter. One underrated feature that I really like about this game is that whenever you enter the vicinity of a drop-off point, at the top of the screen, it tells you how many people are at a given place. Port Knot, for example, has 51,329 people, yet you only ever see one person. Over 50,000 people, and you only see one. Imagine if you went to New York City and only saw a dozen or so guys. That's what makes Death Stranding's world as powerful as it is. Humans are inherently a social species, and the game is about a social experience, but you only ever see the holograms of a few dozen people throughout the entire continent. You physically meet even fewer across the runtime. There are thousands just hidden away, and that is striking imagery on its own. But then you factor in when the game released, and it becomes oddly funny in a way. Death Stranding released in November of 2019. Around that time is when COVID-19 was brought into the public consciousness. I'm sure if you're watching this, I don't need to explain COVID-19 and that whole situation, that really weird patch in all of our lives. But the timing of this game about people living in an isolationist society following a cataclysmic event releasing mere weeks before a global shutdown due to a new virus is ironic, and it's the second time that a major prediction of the world state in a Kojima game has come true, with the first being Metal Gear Solid 2's Sons of Liberty. Sons of Liberty is a game that is continuously evergreen in its predictions of not only the state of digital information and censorship, but how that'll be used in global warfare following the digital age and the construction of artificial intelligence, but that's a topic for another video. The big public health emergency that caused the lockdown officially ended a few years ago, following the creation of a vaccine, but we haven't really seen that event followed up on when it comes to major films, games, books, whatnot. It seems like it was socially blacklisted and we just choose not to mention it. There's been a a few stragglers throughout the years. You've had Bo Burnham's Inside on Netflix, which captured the feeling that everyone had going insane inside of their homes. There was Ryan Johnson's Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, also on Netflix, which feels like a similar glimpse into the 2020 madness of the pandemic. And most recently, you have Ari Aster releasing an explicitly COVID-related Western by the name of Eddington, releasing in July of 2025. But I feel like Death Stranding should definitely be included in that list of pandemic art because of just how close it was to the global shutdown and because of how close to home it hits. You see a lot more of the COVID-isms, for a lack of a better term, once you hit the game's central region, since that's where you'll spend most of your time in Death Stranding. If the first 2 episodes were there to slowly inch you forward through a light tutorial into the real game, episode 3 onwards is the real Death Stranding experience. Each episode onward focuses on a specific character and expanding America. Episode 3 is about Fragile, who is one of the more interesting characters in my opinion, as she used to run the Fragile Express delivery service, and this episode is about restoring the trust that she lost when she was tricked by Higgs into delivering a nuke into the city, blowing it up. The remains of said explosion are still there. You can visit it on the map. This is also the point in the game where they go full force on what I briefly mentioned a moment ago, the social strand system. In a bunch of pre-released content surrounding the game was constantly referred to as the first strand-type game, whatever the hell that meant. It was intriguing to say the least, and people joked about it because surely you're not making a new genre of game, the first strand-type game, but what it meant was just asynchronous multiplayer pretty much. Throughout the entire game, if you're playing online, you'll see various structures and tools left by other players. This could range from a post box to deliver lost cargo to other players, a series of ropes and ladders to help climb over tough obstacles, or a bridge to cross a large body of water and avoid toppling over. The early regions of the game gave you these small extra boosts, but nothing game-changing. The closest you get is a singular bike left around that probably won't get you very far until you have what it takes to make a generator for said bike, since a lot of the tools in the game run off battery power. But once you get past that first zone, the game more or less says go for it and hands you more and more tools to make your life and other players' lives easier. One such tool is the highway, right outside of the starting location. The first portion of the road is pretty much built for you, and all you have to do is contribute a small amount of materials and finish part of the road. From that point on, you can choose to add to the highway if you want, and spend materials to do so. One of the central gameplay mechanics alongside balancing your cargo is balancing your materials. Not just the amount you have stored, but deciding whether or not you want to carry them around and contribute to stuff like the highway system, or if you want to save them and build a bunch of smaller structures like zip lines, generators, watchtowers, and the like. The multiplayer comes into play because when you're assigned a server at the start of your playthrough, you get access to certain structures from certain players. For example, when I went up to the mountains, I was able to build a zipline network where the highway wouldn't go because people had already started making zipline paths. All I had to do was connect a few access points and make a legitimate network. That's where the connection of Death Stranding comes into play. I spent most of this most recent playthrough building the highway system, and because of that, I spent a lot of time grinding out materials, but in the long run, it made doing deliveries a lot easier. Because I spent so much time rebuilding the highways, anyone who contributed to the highway before I built it was also given access to the highway. So I would log back on after a few days after not playing, and my screen would just be filled with thousands of likes from people who drove on the highway that I helped rebuild. It gave me a little dopamine rush. Speaking of likes, they're an interesting feature to say the least. As I mentioned, if someone uses something that you've built or that you've left, you're given a like, and a player can choose to like something as many times as they like within a 7-second window if they want, but they're completely superfluous. They don't add anything aside from add up to a little counter at the bottom right of your screen. They are meaningless. Despite said meaninglessness, people love the dopamine of likes so much that they will leave signs in commonly traveled places so that when you pass them, they get sent a like, even if you didn't mean to pass it. In a similar manner to how mules steal cargo to get that extra dopamine rush, players will do anything they can for just cheap extra likes. It's a very on-the-nose commentary about social media culture and how people will do literally anything for likes, even if that includes embarrassing themselves for a tad bit of internet fame. You see it all the time in the age of IRL streaming and the concept of clip farming, people doing outrageous things in order to get internet fame and cheap Twitter likes after being reposted. Dude, did you see what Faye Swinky said to the homeless guy? It's the exact same concept as someone leaving a no-effort sign just to farm likes. I don't want that to come off as me being smug and saying, I think streaming takes no effort, or my videos are better because they're written and voiced over. They're not. Streaming takes a lot of effort, and it's very hard to get popular by streaming, and I think my videos are shit anyways. But there is a very visible comparison between the almost silly idea that somebody would even care about something as meaningless as a digital like in order to fulfill a dopamine rush in Death Stranding and modern internet culture, again filled by vapid engagement that people just forget about in a day after the fact. Instead of leaving a legacy, you're seen as just entertainment for the day and nothing more. Moving back to Death Stranding, the idea of legacy is also something that's very important to the text of the game and on a metatextual level as well. In the game, the legacy of the player is dictated by how much you contribute to the world and how well you deliver packages. It's presented in your little title next to your ranked distribution at the end of every delivery. If you're insane like me and 100% the game, you're granted the rank of greatest of great deliverers. The legacy of the world and the legacy of Sam Porter is dictated by you, the player. Did you choose to rebuild the highway? Did you complete the racetrack behind the Timefall farm? Did you make a zipline network, or did you just zoom straight through the main story and not connect any additional regions? The idea of legacy also extends past the game itself and into its creation. I mentioned briefly how you can see remnants of Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, when it comes to the star-studded cast of this game, but a lot of the core identity of Death Stranding feels like a response to Phantom Pain. A large point of criticism in that game was the long, messy direction of the cutscenes. The game still has cutscenes, but the camera work and physical direction of each scene is more pleasant to look at. It's arguably better. You can even see a visible contrast in the direction of Death Stranding as a whole. If you own the director's cut, there is an optional quest line in the starting region where you have to sneak around this abandoned factory, and the entire thing is just a Metal Gear reference. At one point, Sam takes a cardboard box full of fruit and hides in it. But in that same cutscene, you can see the direction change back to the Phantom Pain style, where the lens flare comes back and the camera's like handheld and shaky. The mission has some actual story developments as well, and it ends with what I can only describe as a reference to the boss fight in Snake Eater. As you enter this beautiful field, this time you see a bunch of tombstones, and you're just left to keep moving forward. This is mainly just a cheeky reference at his past work, but this is also the most clear-cut look at how Death Stranding is about the legacy of Kojima and how his work has affected him to this point. I like to view it as a reflection on how his past work has connected other people and how that's left an impact on them. Hell, Death Stranding wouldn't have been possible without connections from Metal Gear. Death Stranding was Kojima's first independent venture following his departure from Konami, and the entire game was made possible because a fan of his gave him a bank loan to start Kojima Productions and start work on Death Stranding. But it also acted as a double-edged sword because Kojima's reputation and the reputation of Metal Gear came back to almost bite Death Stranding in the ass. People coming around to like Death Stranding is a relatively recent thing, and I'm glad people are seeing the game for its true quality, but for years the game had garnered a bad reputation. It received mixed reviews from most major outlets as either you get it or you don't type of game, and this feedback was felt throughout gaming discourse at the time, with many people tossing the game off to the side, calling it pretentious, self-indulgent, a movie, which at the time proved a lot of people didn't really get the style of Kojima games, even if they were Metal Gear fans. On a gameplay level, the games are obviously different, but Metal Gear and Death Stranding aren't that different when you look at it at a grander scale, when you look at the bigger picture. They are both system-heavy games with a lot of player freedom and quirky mechanics. They will often take breaks to show you a thick, often plot-heavy narrative with twists and memorable characters, and even more memorable names. Death Stranding wasn't a departure from the directorial legacy Kojima was known for. It's a different flavor of the same thing, but in a good way. Despite that, for a while, the game's legacy was that it was long, overcomplicated, pretentious, and that Kojima was just patting himself on the back after years of good games. One review from the website Steve Ivor went as far as to end the opening paragraph of his review with, quote, "Death Stranding is an irredeemable piece of garbage that should serve as a warning to publishers who give developers carte blanche to create, quote, art," end quote. Another review from Giant Bomb reads, quote, "There's a deep thread of insecurity that runs through it, one that manifests in its unwillingness to commit all the way to the arduousness of the main character's task, that's too willing to break the quietness with mediocre action, and that never trusts the player to understand even the most basic ideas without hitting them over the head with them. There is a weirdo, avant spirit to Death Stranding that I do admire, but that spirit fails to carry the game anywhere worthwhile," end quote. Of course, that's just me nitpicking some negative reviews, and you could do the same thing with positive reviews to a similar extent. But a through line with the negative reviews that you'll notice is that people say what once worked in Metal Gear doesn't work in Death Stranding, because what you do is repetitive and doesn't feel earned the same way sneaking through Shadow Moses was back in '98. So instead, Death Stranding should have just been a movie. That last part is especially noticeable if you look through user reviews of the game, but where this all comes back to legacy is the idea that the game relies solely on the namesake of the creator's legacy, when in reality, I don't believe it does. Death Stranding can and should be enjoyed as an independent experience regardless of your history with Metal Gear. An understanding of the legacy can help you enjoy the game more if you see the similarities, but it shouldn't subtract from your experience because it's not similar enough. When you look at the creator's legacy of making these long, convoluted stories, it makes the idea that Death Stranding should have been a movie all the more confusing. It is a good question to ask. Should Death Stranding have been a movie? I don't think so. I think the story of Death Stranding expands far beyond when the game is at pause, showing you a cutscene. But I think there's this perception that if the game is at pause, then that's when the story's happening. Jake Steinberg has a pretty good piece on this titled "Gamers Don't Understand Story," and in the piece, he explains how gamers often don't consider mechanics as a part of the narrative since the game is still at play, which means the story hasn't started or continued yet. An abridged version of his point reads, quote, "Consider this. Pokemon Red introduces the player to Viridian City almost immediately. There is a gym there, but it's locked and inaccessible. It isn't until the end of the journey, after the player has conquered 7 other gyms, crossed treacherous lands, and triumphed over rivals, that they return to Viridian to claim their final badge," end quote. He continues a bit later with, quote, "This too is storytelling. It is the crafting of experience, the deliberate arrangement of systems, spaces, and obstacles to make the player feel something. And yet, I feel this kind of narrative design is largely ignored in favor of the plot that is written in dialogue exchanges and big stakes. Gamers don't consider the closed gym in Viridian City a narrative decision, nor the way that the first Pokemon becomes the catalyst of their journey. Those are mechanics, not story, but they are wrong. Storytelling in games is not confined to the cinematic or the literary. It is in the spaces we inhabit, the paths we trace, the mechanics we master. When a game asks us to move, it is asking us to participate in the narrative," end quote. In this piece, he uses Pokemon Red as a central example, but Death Stranding fits this glove perfectly. Yes, the game has long and convoluted narrative arcs that slowly untwine itself to you if you just watch the cutscenes, but as I mentioned earlier, Sam's arc and the player's arc is one and the same, as both primarily happen through gameplay. His arc doesn't really make sense if there wasn't 50 hours of you going out of your way to level up facilities, deliver packages, and rebuild America in whatever way you so choose. Death Stranding's narrative fundamentally doesn't work as a movie because alongside Sam's arc, the crux of the game's closing moments relies on your connection with your BB, Lou. If you're one of the many players who choose to ignore Lou when she cries because they don't want to stop and soothe her, if you don't choose to run off a ramp and do a silly jump to make Lou laugh, then you aren't engaging with the real story of Death Stranding, because the real story is what you make of your time with the game and how you form these bonds. Throughout the runtime, the facilities you connect with the UCA will send you emails. They consist of information about their lives, how you improved it by connecting them to the UCA, philosophical or world-building jargon, or miscellaneous order requests. They are completely optional, and alongside the journal entries you collect throughout the entire game, they act as additional world-building, giving depth to all the characters you come across, and filling in the blanks about the world without stopping every 10 minutes to give you a call and explain why something exists or how it exists. When I did my 100% completion playthrough for the first time after I beat the game, I would stop and read the emails as they flooded into my inbox, even if it was just some guy at a distribution center sending me an email saying something like, "Hey Sam, thanks for the package. It really helped me take my morning shit. You're the best," with 7 likes attached. I would stop and read it because it was the little things and the additional trinkets you got for spending more time and leveling up these facilities that really truly made me appreciate the game. One aspect that I never really thought about until my most recent playthrough is just how different everyone's Sam truly is. To further emphasize the player's arc and Sam's being one and the same, when leveling up different locations, the inhabitants of each will give you upgrades to your arsenal. Sometimes it'll be something mechanical to make your deliveries easier, other times it's just cosmetic to make Sam look funny. Depending on who and what quests you do, you can get something as stupid as a Santa hat that plays little jingle bells, or you can get a Half-Life head crab in a Half-Life themed truck. Or it can be something that's actually useful, like exo legs for traversing the snow faster. But all these cosmetic and mechanical additions makes everyone's Sam just a little bit different. Even in cutscenes, you'll see these mechanical features, like you can have V's face lines from Cyberpunk on there, or you can wear a hat, a head crab, or you can have a different outfit. It's all these little things that just go to make everyone's Sam just a tad bit different, and I really like that about the game. Death Stranding is a mechanical, self-sustaining loop. Its sole purpose is to keep you hooked on the dopamine of delivering packages, and it works, because it has such a well-defined goal. Eventually, you'll satiate your need to deliver packages. You'll deliver enough packages, but if you ever want to come back and deliver some more, you very easily can. Again, I'd like to draw a connection to Metal Gear Solid 5, since I feel like that game also has a play forever style loop. That game has these multiplayer missions where you could sneak onto another player's mother base and sabotage them for rewards. Much like Death Stranding, it was asynchronous. You never dealt with another player by name directly, but the feedback loop of disarming other players and then defending yours in retaliation was something that I loved about that game. The reason that I draw so many comparisons between Metal Gear Solid 5 and Death Stranding is because I feel like they're arguably two of Kojima's most misunderstood works. People have talked to death about the first three Metal Gear Solid games, rightfully so, and the fourth isn't really talked about as much since it's not as widely available. It's stranded on almost 20-year-old hardware, but that's besides the point. But there's also been this pattern. Everything after Snake Eater, and even before that, but primarily after Snake Eater, most projects have been met with some sort of pushback. It seems like with each new game, there's a more vocal amount of people who are not happy with this new vision and how they wish it would just return to the old formula. But Phantom Pain, despite its troubles, remains one of my favorite entries in the series because the mechanical feedback of playing that game in both a moment-to-moment and mission-by-mission structure is just so compelling to me. Death Stranding is the same way. Typically in games, the moment-to-moment gameplay of walking is not something really thought about, since many consider that to be downtime between big action set pieces. But in Death Stranding, walking is obviously the uptime of the game, with action set pieces being pretty few and far between unless you choose to go harass some mules or terrorists. It's the mechanical implementation of the walking that is interesting to me. The game lets you stack an absurd amount of cargo on your back, especially if you've leveled up your cargo skill. And many early impressions of the game saw people stacking cargo very high and then becoming annoyed when they would slow down and sway side to side and then eventually fall over. But the cargo management game is just as vital as the act of walking. It asks the player, do you stack cargo high and risk having to hold the triggers the entire time, which is kind of uncomfortable, to prevent falling, or do you spread the cargo out across your body, potentially sacrificing stuff like exo legs or having to bring additional cargo floats and limiting yourself when it comes to upward mobility so you don't have to hold the triggers. Especially since optional lost cargo is scattered all over the place, it's almost impossible to stay optimized all the time considering all the obstacles you must face. Yes, it's easy to zone out when playing the game, but if you do, you risk falling over since you aren't paying attention to the button prompts. Throughout my entire time, the only times that I wasn't paying attention and it was able to zone out was when I built the highway systems. It was my reward for spending so much time and effort and materials rebuilding the highway. You get access to pretty much a scot-free path to most major distribution centers with a free energy trail down the middle so you don't run out of car battery. But again, this comes with the downside of being a massive time and material sink. There is no true way to play Death Stranding. You can play it as a walking simulator. You can never connect with player structures and strictly walk from point A to B with an assload of cargo on you. Or you can skate by on abusing other people's structures while never actually contributing to anything. Or you can be the guy who places a bunch of stuff for other people. It all comes back to Death Stranding being this liberating experience. It's one of the most free games that I've played as far as big budget AAA open world games go. I wouldn't say it's an immersive sim, but it's possibly the most free I've felt in a game like this. That freedom extends to the story as well in a way. Many have said that the game is just walking into a 30-minute cutscene, leaving, and then walking into another cutscene, but I just can't agree with that perception. I've been over how the first few hours of the game are pretty hand-holdy, but once you get to that central region, you can go literal hours without a traditional narrative development, since the game just catches you up after deliveries. It's not until you connect a major middle part of the region where the story catches back up for the bit and you're swept back into combat. Starting with episode 4, the game periodically throws you into these sequences, where you have to fight off a military guy named Clifford Unger. They are fine, possibly the weakest aspect of the game, just because the combat isn't anything to write home about. The gunplay feels like a watered-down version of Phantom Pain, and that's the best thing I can say about it. When you're let free in the world and you have the ability to mess with mules and the eventual terrorists you come across, the combat feels a lot better there, since you're not only given a better arsenal of tools to use, you have a lot more freedom in how to approach the combat encounters, especially compared to the Clifford Unger sequences. It's not until one of the last ones towards the end of the game where you get even the slightest bit of freedom to take on the encounter how you please. That's not to say I don't like the combat or the Clifford sequences, I do. I just don't think they're as up to snuff as the rest of the game, but the narrative results from each section make them worth the frustrating time you'll have on these sections. Trying to find a spot to fit the combat into is actually kind of difficult here because there really isn't much to it. You can punch, jump, drop kick, shoot guys. I mean, there's not really much to it in this game. Again, it's like a watered down version of Phantom Pain, so it's still kind of good. It's just nothing to write home about. But again, it's the narrative payoff that comes from these forced combat sequences that really make it worth it, in my opinion. Up to this point, Death Stranding's episodes have been a few hours in length, with the only real deviance being the Clifford sections, which are only about 20 to 30 minutes each, because each chapter is just the one mission. Each narrative chunk comes at the tail end of the episode, following a few hours of you doing your own thing in the world. If it's not obvious up to this point, I loved this structure, as nothing felt too forced, and the TV structure, which, again, it was something that was messed with Phantom Pain, is my preferred way of game structuring. Games are so long that I find whenever they try and fit a standard 3-act structure, it can result in the game somehow rushing to wrap itself up, instead of containing itself in little arcs that come together towards the end. It's a point that I brought up with both Dying Light titles, and I feel like games really do just benefit from a larger structure, whether it be episodic, more acts, anything apart from that 3-act structure, since, again, it causes the game to more or less rush itself. Obviously, that's not always the case. I think shorter games can benefit from a traditional 3-act structure, but I think as a whole, as video games get longer, the further we get from that traditional film structure and go into a more episodic or chapter-focused approach, the better. I think Death Stranding works perfectly with its episodic structure. The arc of the character is usually wrapped up within their episode, with a few exceptions, and so by the time the game wraps itself up, it feels like you've had time to get to know these characters, whether they've been around since the start, or because you just spent a few hours helping them out. Especially with how out there Death Stranding can get towards the end, it's a welcome change of pace. Your goal the entire game has been to connect America to the chiral network, and throughout the entire runtime, you've been told that connecting Edge Knot City, the last city, will be difficult because the pathway there has been engulfed with tar, making it near impossible to cross, and lo and behold, when you get there, you can't cross it. If you try and just run across, you'll drown. This is a trick that the game does a few times where you're expected to use prior game knowledge or to listen exactly to what the game tells you, but the game will not give you a pop-up instruction on what to do. A prior example of this is early on in the game, you have to deliver a package, and then a cutscene plays where a strange man that looks and sounds exactly like Troy Baker, but it's not Higgs, don't worry, gives you a strange package off the record. And what you have to do is deliver this package to South Knot. Except, not really, because when you inspect the device in the cargo management menu, you see it's a small thermonuclear bomb. And so you're like, well, shit, I gotta take this to Fragile. But how do you take it to Fragile? Well, you take the package, go in a private room, and then you go to the Fragile teleport option. And then Fragile comes up, and she's like, hey, Sam, what's this? And Sam's like, it's a bomb. And so you gotta get, I sound like J.C. Denton. It's a bomb. Anyways, Fragile tells you to take the bomb to the tar crater in the middle of the map and just toss it in there, so when the bomb blows up, it reduces the damage. This trick that the game does is not something that's very common throughout, but it does happen from time to time. So here with the tar belt, all you have to do is get purposely caught by BTs. Throughout the game, whenever you get caught by a BT, they'll drag you in their puddle and then it'll cause like a big BT monster to spawn. And when this monster spawns, you can fight it or run away. And here, towards the end of the game, you purposely get caught so you get dragged out into the tar belt to a point to where you won't drown, and then you run past the BT monster to Amelie. It takes a punishment from throughout the game and requires the player to not only remember it exists at this moment, but to actively utilize what has been a punishment this whole time to progress the game. I think it's a cute little trick. As I mentioned, you're not supposed to fight the BT. Your goal is to run past it and make it to Edge Knot so you can connect the city. Once you do that, the game doesn't slow down at all. You sneak past a bunch of jellyfish BT and then have to fight this giant, massive kaiju BT that has Amelie in it and is being controlled by Higgs. The BT monster fights are much more enjoyable than the Clifford sections in my opinion, primarily because they don't shoot back at you and because you have a wider arsenal to fight them. That's not to say they don't attack you, because they do. They often have powerful attacks, but just the fact that they don't have guns makes it a little bit more enjoyable, in my opinion. But speaking of Higgs, I haven't really talked about him a whole lot. He's kind of just popped up throughout the story to summon a big BT for you to fight and then just be a general nuisance. But I absolutely adore Higgs in this game. I think Higgs is arguably Troy Baker's best performance, alongside his performance of Joel in The Last of Us, Joker in Batman Arkham Origins, and Ocelot in The Phantom Pain. Higgs is kind of just a nuisance. He's a dick, but in a very charismatic way. He has an entire side quest where he pretends to be somebody else so that you'll deliver him pizza. And then on the last delivery, you find out that it's Higgs. So you've just been delivering him pizza the whole time because he thought it was funny. You wouldn't really think Higgs is anything special until you get to these last few episodes where you really get to see what Higgs is. You get to see him as a character, and he's so much fun in this game. After that giant kaiju fight, there is an extended sequence where you do 2 back-to-back boss fights with Higgs on the beach, where one expects you to sneak behind him and attack him a few times, and the other is a full-fledged, goofy-ass boss fight. Higgs even refers to it as a good old-fashioned boss fight. There are health bars at the top of the screen, and the game gives you these elaborate fist-fight controls that are never used again, and it just goes on for so long, but in a good way. It goes on for longer than you would ever think. It's pathetic watching these two go at it until they're both exhausted. The fight starts off relatively fast-paced. It's not until later on in the fight, when you've both healed yourself a couple of times and everything just kind of slows down. You're both very, very exhausted. Even though your stamina bar is full, Higgs is tired, Sam is visibly tired, and it's just 2 men just pathetically wailing on each other until the very end. The thing is that to Higgs, this is all a game. He even acknowledges it. He says something along the lines of, you won the game once you beat him. But at this ending portion of the game, well, close to ending, the game falls a little bit too head over heels with the video game aspect of it all, in my opinion. I like all the stupid video game stuff. I think it's funny, but what it does is causes tonal whiplash in a way. Throughout this entire boss fight sequence, Amelie is hooked up in this big spider web in the background, a classic damsel in distress for Sam to come save. It was his reasoning for traveling west after all, because Higgs had her captured. But it's here where arguably the game's most notorious line is uttered. Amelie explains how everything was orchestrated by Die Hardman to have Sam come west because Amelie was the only thing that he cared about, and in response to learning this information, Sam says, quote, "Great, so I'm Mario and you're Princess Peach," and asks how do they leave the beach they're on, and Amelie responds with, "We run together, like Mario and Princess Peach." I absolutely adore this line. I think it's one of the funniest lines ever uttered in a video game. It just makes me laugh because of how on the nose and stupid it is. In a game with genuine, serious characters named Die Hardman, Higgs, Sam Porter, and Deadman, it takes some serious balls to have Amelie look into the camera, look at the player, and tell you that this whole adventure was as if you were Mario and she is Princess Peach. And if you want to overanalyze that line and how it connects back to video game history, how this entire game was just, yes, you're going to another castle because Amelie's not there, Princess Peach is not in this castle, you can. It's there, but I just think the line is so absolutely hilarious. People obviously overreacted to this when it came out. They thought it was the dumbest thing ever, but it's purposely camp. It's like in The Evil Within 2 when the main character and a survivor are talking in a garage and someone says, "There's an evil within too," and they both look at the camera. That's what it is. It's intentionally camp and funny, but some people just miss that. It's a phenomenon that happens from time to time when a film is purposely trying to be funny or when a game is purposely trying to be cringe or on the nose. People seem to take that and go, "Look, this is cringe. This is bad. The developers were not trying to do this. The people making the movie were not trying to do this. They were trying to make something good and it turned out cringy," when that's just clearly not the point. And here you can tell it's not supposed to be 100% serious because after the line, there is a slow motion running sequence for a moment and then the game gets all serious again, like it never happened. Some would say that that's tonal whiplash, and it is, but coming immediately after the game had me fight Higgs in a match of Tekken, health bars and all, I oddly don't think it's out of place. It's a tone reset. The game knows all the absurd things you just did. Crossed a tar belt, fought a giant BT monster, came back to life, fought Higgs on the beach, Amelie was in a big spider web. The game is purposely taking the piss. And Sam doesn't think it's odd either. He's just had enough of this shit. So, you two run. Try and run all the way back home, like how Sam did when he would visit the beach as a child. Throughout the remaining few hours of the game gets really narratively dense, and me trying to explain it all would do the game a massive disservice, because Death Stranding is a game that's not spoken well. If I sit here and try to explain the story of Death Stranding without having them play the game, they'll be lost, because I'll just keep throwing new words at them, but you don't have time to experience what it means like if you play the game. The way the game is written and how it takes advantage of its longer runtime is to ease players into the world. It gives breathing room to all the weird concepts and new terms that you're going to learn. But before the narrative stuff hits, the game has one last major job for you. Go back east. That's all. It's this beautiful stretch of gameplay where you get one last look at the world that you've created, everything that you and every other player that's contributed has done up to this point. It doesn't matter how you get back, only that you start from one coast and go to the other. I absolutely adore this section. The atmosphere of the rain coming down constantly, mixed with the constant needle drops, provides this tonal shift to really signify to the player that this is it. Not in a climactic sense, but in an emotional sense. It's relatively light on challenge, it's just you kind of coasting back to the start. There's a few BT areas, and you can pretty much ignore all the combat, and throughout Deadman will call you, tell you some new information about Clifford, but it's just one long stretch of Death Stranding. Heading back east leads you to the last Clifford section of the game, and it's probably the best one in the entire game. Throughout, you've been to different war-torn areas, and you've pretty much only had the option of shooting the guys. But here, you get some freedom to tackle how you want, and the cutscene at the end is a great bombshell. In the end, Clifford reveals that the BB he was looking for wasn't Lou, it was Sam, which means that all the BB flashbacks you've been seeing throughout the game was actually Sam's perspective. It also drops a massive bombshell that Sam was originally a bridge baby, but the game asks you to put a pin in that for a moment because Deadman has something very important for you. Throughout the game, Amelie has been this ever-elusive figure, your Princess Peach. She's been Sam's primary motivator for going west, since she's his sister. He even has a picture of him, Amelie, and Bridget, but Bridget's face is faded out. One big happy family. The thing is that nobody has ever actually seen Amelie and lived to prove that she's real. On her big expedition out west where she got captured, nobody from her team lived other than her, and Sam is the only person who's ever actually met her on the beach, and that's because of the beach. Die Hardman connects the dots, though. He figures out that Amelie isn't real, and what is referred to as an extinction entity, a concept loosely explained by Hartman a few hours ago. In short, scientists theorize that there's been multiple Death Strandings throughout history, and the root cause of each one is because of one extinction entity, an entity whose sole job is to forward the evolution by acting as a catalyst for mass extinction. It's revealed to Sam a bit later that Bridget and Amelie were actually one and the same, and I actually quite like this twist. It's foreshadowed all the way at the start of the game. When Bridget dies in your arms, the last thing she says to you is, "I'll see you on the beach," and for a brief moment, her face turns into Amelie's face. You don't think of anything at the moment because you just started the game, but once you connect the dots, it all just makes sense. Once on the beach, the game enters this very long narrative stretch. Amelie hands you a gun and tells you to either shoot her to end the extinction or don't, and you're not going to stop the extinction, but she's tired of waiting, and so you can do that. You can let her walk off into the sunset, causing extinction, or you can shoot her, but when you shoot her, the bullets don't do anything. Just like with the tar belt and with the nuke, the game makes you think a bit outside the box here. You aren't supposed to listen to Amelie. She's extinction, and in order to make a better future for everyone, you have to act for yourself. So, the correct option is to run up to her and give her a hug. Amelie sees the value in life and agrees to hold off the extinction until its natural point. The reason she wanted to speed everything up was because she was tired of waiting all alone on the beach. It's incredibly selfish, but it's something that you would resonate with, especially following your reaction to the next scene. You wake up on the beach, and you're blue. That's it. The game starts playing credits, and you're just supposed to run around until Sam runs out of breath, sits down, and Amelie explains something to Sam. But the thing is that the scene doesn't just happen once. It's 20 minutes of this. You can't just put down the controller and leave. You have to sit there and play the game. Granted, you can skip the cutscenes of Amelie talking, but at a minimum, you still have to run around while the credits play. It's intentionally boring. You're being relegated to a fraction of what Amelie had to deal with. This 20-minute waiting sequence is all it takes to drive a player mad, so imagine that for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The entire sequence is a reminder of why video games work so well as an art form. They can force the player to do things they don't want to do in order to progress. Unlike a passive art form, you aren't a bystander. You have to sit and be bored instead of watching somebody else be bored. It's essential to the experiment of Death Stranding. In my eyes, the purpose of Death Stranding was to push the player and see just how much they will tolerate a game and its friction. The game is primarily delivering packages, and that gameplay loop is fun on its own, in my opinion, like I mentioned earlier, but the game constantly forcing you to play by its rules and narrative while simultaneously being one of the most freeing player experiences in the open world is not wholly unique to Death Stranding, but is a core idea behind the game. The legacy of Kojima's games have led to this point, with each game becoming larger and larger. Metal Gear was linear up until Phantom Pain when it went open world. Then PT decided to have the player interact with the game in weird ways, talking to the controller, going through areas backwards. Everything came together and led into Death Stranding, taking the aspects that people loved from the past games, that being the hands-on approach to storytelling, and applying that to a game about liberation and freedom of player choice, but without the confines of Phantom Pain's universal legacy and the gameplay requirements. There was a part of me that slightly wanted to just have this sequence play out in full while I talked over it, maybe just talk about some random off-topic things or aspects of the game that I didn't really have a spot here in the video for, but I decided against it because I ultimately realized that no matter how I did it, the joke would not have been worth it. It's not that funny, but if you are earnestly trying to have a dialogue with Death Stranding, the sequence where you're stranded on the beach is the game's most earnest attempt to stop and ask you why. Why play the game? What kept you here so long? Statistically, most players don't finish games. They're just so long and people have lives, so not everyone will decide to finish a 30, 40, 50-hour game. They'll play it until they've had enough and then stop and move on to something else. They may watch a recap video or a let's play instead, but safe to say they just won't finish the game. Just like how most people don't finish YouTube videos or really anything of the sort. We are very easily distracted. But the best part about the questions Death Stranding asks, especially if you consider 100% completing the game, is that there's no right answer. Not at all. I finished my first playthrough of the game a few years ago at around 35 hours. That's about how long it'll take you to do the mainline story, maybe do some side stuff. But I decided that wasn't enough. So I spent another 60 hours finishing up the game because I wanted more Death Stranding. I was honestly about to do the same for this video because I just kept wanting to play despite the fact that I had shit to do. On a certain level, the game knows that as well. After the story concludes, the game will just drop you back in the world. It doesn't boot you back to the main menu. It doesn't ask you if you want to continue. It doesn't offer a new game plus. It just tells you to keep on keeping on. Am I looking too far into how the game handles player continuing after the story? Yes, but I don't care. The game has two major ending sequences. After you are rescued from the beach by your friends, we fast forward to the inauguration of Die Hardman as the president of the UCA. He gives his speech and Sam walks out halfway through. Deadman catches him in the hall. He catches the player up on everything that's happened in case they missed it, and explains that Die Hardman was actually the one responsible for Cliff's death, something you saw briefly in the flashbacks. Die Hardman catches you in the hallway after his speech and tells you everything. Tommy Earl Jenkins is absolutely fantastic here. I'm just going to let this scene play out in full because I can't put to words just how phenomenal his performance is here.
Sam. I don't expect you to forgive me. But would you hear me out? I killed Captain Clifford Unger. I would tell you I did it for America. For love of country. But I didn't. I did it for her. Because I loved her with all my heart. She was everything to me. Everything. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses. I just want you to know that not a day's gone by when I haven't thought about it. Time didn't help. Or the mask. Please, let me finish. The captain, saved my life. You know why they call me Die Hardman. Because he wouldn't let me die. He brought my sorry ass back home every time. And I loved him as much as I loved her. And when he stared me down, that ghost, I knew he was here to kill me, to make it right. And why shouldn't he? Why didn't he? He couldn't save his kid, his baby. And that's what brought him back. I guess when he saw I was trying to do my part for America, he remembered who he was. And he forgave me. God! But I don't deserve it, God damn it! There is no atoning for what I've done. God! But maybe this is the next best thing. Maybe he brought me back from the beach for a reason. One last time. He wanted me to do this. To keep on being Die Hardman.
No. He didn't. Nobody wants a president who acts like they're immortal. And if you're not scared of death, how can you value life? And life is pretty fucking fragile right now. And yeah, the old ways die hard. But that's what's gonna have to happen if we're gonna come together and build a better America. That gun won't help you here. That's her words, not mine.
Thank you, Sam.
His performance here is one of the all-time great scenes that the medium of gaming has produced, in my opinion. You see a man at his weakest. Somebody who before wouldn't even take off his mask is now covering your shoes in snot. That beat is then immediately followed up by Deadman informing Sam that you have to dispose of Lou since the BB is injured and at risk of necrotizing. But you could take Lou out of the pod and risk the death that comes with that and go off the grid, but then again, that would mean you're breaking the new laws of the UCA. So, off you go. Fragile asks Sam one last time if he wants to join the Fragile Express, and he explains how he still feels alone. Despite helping everyone and making these connections, he still feels as alone as when he was in the cave at the start of the game, and it makes sense. Despite drawing all these connections between everyone, you never truly get to be a member of these groups. You're almost like a tool, and without Lou, the one person you've had by your side the entire game, it makes sense why Sam would just want to be alone. So, he heads to the incinerator. You end the game just as you started, walking someone important to Sam to be incinerated. As you walk, the camera pans out, showing you the environment one last time while BB's theme plays, a beautiful track made to match the sweeping vistas that even something as simple as the starting region can provide. Unlike the first time, there is no cargo, no balancing. You've mastered the game, so the game just lets you go. One last walk, and it's your easiest mechanical delivery, but hardest emotionally. As you approach the incinerator, you plug Lou's pod in one last time, and this time you're shown everything, an almost 40-minute long unbroken cutscene showing exactly what happened to Clifford Unger. He had his wife brought in, and Sam turned into a bridge baby because he was misled by Bridges. He thought he was helping everyone, but eventually, he grew tired of waiting, and Die Hardman tells him that it's too late now to just take BB and run, so he puts his wife out of her comatose misery and takes Sam. He tries to run, but doesn't get far at all, and in the end, he's backed into a corner, and in his last moments, he takes Sam out of the pod and refuses to hand over the baby. Bridget has Cliff killed, but by shooting Cliff, they also end up hitting Sam, killing him. It's here we see baby Sam on the beach, and Amelie turns Sam into a repatriate, giving him a new Ka to go along with his Ha. Cutting back to the real world, we see Die Hardman question if Sam should be commissioned as a BB because he can't work as a bridge baby. He died. He has no link to the beach. But instead, Bridget takes him as her child, raising him. We then cut to Sam burning his cufflinks, physically burning the bridges he built. And with Lou outside her pod, Sam is trying his best to revive her. The scene reads as if it's something in vain, like it's already too late. It's emotional. You can see Lou's BT version appearing. You can see the thread to the beach right there. But as Sam brings Lou in for one last hug towards his Kipu, his knot to the other side, his way back home, Lou comes back. Sam and Lou head outside and look towards the sky. No longer members of the UCA, with life ahead of them. The game cuts to credits. It's an absolutely beautiful sequence. I adore it. And it makes me an emotional wreck every single time. At the start of the video, I said I've always had trouble putting to words how I feel about Death Stranding. Not because it's complicated or because I don't like it, but to me, the idea of sitting down and making a video talking about this game that I love so much kind of frightened me in a way. What if I don't do the game justice? What if I somehow make the worst Death Stranding video imaginable? But I can only blush about this game to the same people over and over again before it just becomes tiresome. I obviously didn't cover everything I love about the game in the video. That would make this video absurdly long, and Whitelight already did the absurdly long Death Stranding video bit a few years back. But still, even thousands of words later, I still can't quite figure out what to say about Death Stranding other than it's my favorite game of all time. I think that it's not only Kojima's best game, but proof of what the medium can be and how well it blends together the best aspects of every other medium and creates this amalgamation of art. You can pick apart the game for its faults, yeah, but I don't care. To me, they're meaningless in the grand scheme of everything. The end result is what I care about, and in this case, it really is about the journey. It sounds corny, but it's true. Now that I've made this video, I may revisit it in a few years' time to see how this game holds up or how the video holds up and how my perception of the game holds up following the sequel and the subsequent non-Death Stranding games that Kojima Productions will release at some point. Hell, I might just have a completely different favorite game by then. I hope I do, but only time will tell. But even if that's the case, this game will always hold a special place in my heart because I played it at such an important moment in my life. For as stupid as the plot can be when described out loud, for as dumb as the driving can be at times, for as dumb as the whole experience is, the game wears its heart on its sleeve, so large that you would think it's a tumor. That's why I always recommend this game to literally everyone I talk to, because surely there is something here for everyone to enjoy, even if it takes a while to get there. But that's why the game tells you to keep on keeping on, and the best part is just around the corner. It sounds like I'm trying to describe Death Stranding as the picture of the guy mining for diamonds and quitting right before he reaches them, but a good amount of people who bounce off the game in the early stages honestly make the game feel like that sometimes. If you've made it this far in the video, I'm sure I don't need to convince you to play Death Stranding. You've either played through it already or are just really interested in the game and have intentions of playing it and just haven't gotten around to it. But that was another aspect that I questioned when making this video. Is it a persuasive piece? Would this video be enough to make somebody want to play Death Stranding? I don't think so, because I told people to leave if they haven't played the game. We all know that spoiler warnings don't mean shit and people will stay regardless, but is the fact that my video is just me blushing about the game for an hour or however long this is just me persuading them, or is it just me being a fan yelling out to other fans, not persuading them, just circle jerking, for a lack of a better term? This isn't a review or anything, it's just me needing somewhere to scream after they kicked me out of the library for being too loud. But that probably doesn't matter. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's weird to call something like this a passion project, but I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I've been wanting to make this video, this type of video about Death Stranding, since I started doing these when I was like 15 or 16. Granted, none of those scripts are available to the public or me, since I deleted them and they were never turned into videos, so they're all lost Breezu media, whatever the hell that means. But I vividly remember sitting in college making drafts of scripts, rough outlines, and all the sort when this is one of the games that I always wanted to talk about. I just always had this itch in the back of my mind to talk about why Death Stranding was actually super good. So, thank you for listening to me ramble about this stupid game about Mario and Princess Peach. If you want to support the channel, you can like, comment, share, do all the YouTube bells and whistles. But with that out of the way, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.